Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review the movie called The Shadow. So, this is a HBO Max movie, or you could go out of your way to probably watch this film through probably a app that I've kind of gone into now, which is Ultra Play HD Movies 2020. Just kind of went into there to just kind of see what I could watch, and it seems that I have an endless amount of things that I could watch on that app. But also, I could watch it on HBO Max. So I've just currently obtained HBO Max. I'm just saying another convenient way to say that you've seen this movie. There's a ton of movie apps out there, like a Movie Pro or any number of other kind of things that you could actually conveniently see this for absolutely free if you are just in the means of just stubbornly going like, well, I want to watch this movie, but I want to watch it for free. If you don't have a HBO Max subscription. So, funny enough, The Shadow was actually a DC Comics character. I think eventually they ended up having The Shadow kind of mixed in with a couple other characters to make some other kind of team out of that, but I've kind of been out of touch with that character. Eventually, I'll get to know things here and there and about what had happened with that character, but reasonably, it's a DC comic books character. Eventually, I ended up kind of finding some issues of the Shadow somewhere, I think in like some antique store. So I was like, oh my god, I gotta grab this up. Because knowing how rare this character was and knowing how um, really just interesting this character was, and eventually I'm assuming at some point in time they're going to remake this character, I would assess to a much more modern time period. I would assess. If not, then like I would just remake the movie just to kind of get some stuff out there, just to make some more money. When looking at it, I think they could make HBO exclusive content that is uh, using the DC characters, and most people won't even know about it. But anyways, so I would say that this movie is still a thumbs up movie because I like how it's so bizarre. If you have an HBO Max subscription, anyways, it's probably good to pop this movie in. There is a lot of good actors within this movie that have passed away. Peter Boyle, who of course a lot of people might know from the Young Frankenstein movie, Ian McKellen, Lord of the Rings, Tim Curry from the movie It and Clue, and a lot of other things. Uh, Alec Baldwin, of course, we've seen him in a number of things, Mission Impossible movies, Hunt for Red Octobers, and so many other things. I think there's probably a much more notable thing that Alec Baldwin has probably been in, but to each their own. Going into this movie, I like it on it being such a freaking just bizarre movie. It's bizarre. There is really just a thing of the Shadow needing to have the this mental ability, as if like a Charles Xavier thing, to base. And I'm my hair's all weird. The Shadow has this ability to manipulate the minds of men or just people, having them uh, having people who are thinking one thing, and Alec Baldwin comes in and says, "No, you do not want to. You do not want to do the thing that you just said. You want to never think of that of which you never said. And if anything, that person that you have just been talking about, you don't even know who that is anymore," and so on and so forth. Kind of doing like the Jedi mind trick to people. It's kind of the Jedi mind trick before or during or whatever like that time was going on. Um, so we have a character that kind of has like a Jedi mind trick to him, but also we end up having like a Jekyll and Hyde situation where we have Alec Baldwin eventually within a bulk of the time within a taxi cab, turning from a normal human to a seemingly gunslinger of sorts, and he ends up putting a big, huge like bandana over his face and hat and duo pistols, and he ends up calling himself the Shadow. And the most fascinating thing about this character is the art of illusion going on in here and in this movie, which there are several times where they are to try to pull off some kind of magician act within this movie, and I think it's kind of fascinating. There is one point where we have Shua Khan, who is kind of the villain in this movie. There's this one thing where he is just kind of kneeling down onto this ground, and eventually he starts shifting his outfit, and we find that the outfit blends in with where he is kind of kneeling down at. And then when he starts to shift, you can start to see the picture kind of change and shift. And I was like, wow, that's kind of really cool. Like, I wish more movies could have done that. And plus, I like the optical illusion of which that this movie goes into. But eventually we have Alec Baldwin's character eventually meeting up with a girl named Margot Lane. And it seems that this girl has the abilities to read people's thoughts. And eventually we have it to where Alec Baldwin finds her or Lamont, finds her really, really fascinating and really wants to spend more time with her. But eventually he realizes how dangerous it is to really have her spend time with him because of how really damaged she is. But on top of that, he doesn't want her to know that he's the Shadow, and Margot will be able to figure that out quite easily because Alec Baldwin's powers of forced persuasion doesn't exactly work on her either. When we'll find that out in the movie. So I really enjoy this film. I really like it for how bizarre it is. We have a dagger that ends up having a life of its own in this movie, and I'm like, this has got to be the most weirdest thing. It's so weird. And like, there's so much stuff that doesn't seem quite understood or explained within this movie. I hope there is at points in here where I'm gonna talk about what is to go on, that I can even find, like, there's some characters in this movie that don't exactly have a picture on here, and I'm trying to think of who the actual monk is that gets to talk to Alec Baldwin. I'm having a hard time finding that. Yeah, like, recently to me, this almost kind of reminds me a little bit of Big Trouble in Little China, just because of how odd it is. Just of how, like, it doesn't go the most convenient paths. It kind of, like, jumps around a little bit. You just be like, oh, okay, well, hey, yeah, this old assassin guy, well, he's just gonna live forever as this Shadow character, and yeah, and he's just gonna go into modern time, and we're gonna have someone follow him into modern time, which will be his villain of the story. So odd. But I like how odd it is, and so let's go out of our way to finally say that we've reviewed this film. Go ahead and check it out. Again, it's a 1994 film, but they even wanted to have it be in a certain time period, so it's not like modern day 1994. And so, like, it's kind of interesting to kind of live in a movie where it's a simpler time, I guess. So yeah, let's go into spoiler times about this movie. I would say overall positive movie just because it's freaking goofy. It's goofy. It's weird. It's such a weird film. You have it to where a lot of times when the Shadow is to be put into this movie, I'm like, this has got to be some weirdest crap that you've ever seen. Like, the Shadow is just goofy, like, ha 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 ha, ha, laughing, and most of his villains just end up being, like, insane. And because they end up just kind of firing into the sky, not knowing where exactly this character is. And yeah, I just find it to be just bizarre and hilarious. So let's go out of our way to say that we are in spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So we have a guy named Lamont Cranston, but he had been somebody previous before that, because we have it to where Lamont Cranston's character has seemingly lived a lot of lifetimes. So we have it to where seemingly Lamont Cranston before this had turned into some kind of ruler of this part of world. And so we have it to where we have people where Lamont had gone and had them killed, which led them to have a monk come and steal Alec Baldwin in the middle of the night to tell him that he is going to be the perfect person to become the Shadow. That he doesn't exactly know who he is anymore, and it seems that he's a person that has these awful dreams. And so we have this monk telling Lamont, or Alec Baldwin's character, in these early stages of this flashback, that he is to become this Shadow, whether he wants it to or not. So we have it to where Alec Baldwin ends up going and seemingly retrieving this dagger, and we end up having this dagger having a face and a mouth towards the end of the dagger. And so we have it to where Alec Baldwin ends up fighting with this dagger to be flung all kinds of places, and to eventually have this dagger bite this Alec Baldwin in the hand. And we have it to where this dagger like stabs at Alec Baldwin in the leg and all kinds of things, to eventually to where this dagger just takes complete and utter just beats the living crap out of Alec Baldwin's character, to where this monk eventually retrieves this dagger, and then to where Alec Baldwin is like, well, okay, I guess I'll just believe anything you say after that. So cue us pushing on into modern times. So we have here a museum that kind of accumulates artifacts. And so we eventually have this museum who ends up getting a silver coffin of sorts. And so this coffin is supposed to have within it the Genghis Khan. And so these museum guys are like, oh my god, we have just gotten a coffin that ties into Genghis Khan, and it's beautiful. Oh my god, we have to go and we have to see how much this is worth. And so, well, some police officer is checking on, or is kind of watching over, the security guard is watching over this coffin. The coffin ends up opening to, instead of having Genghis Khan in it, we end up having Shawan Khan, which is the last relative of Genghis Khan. And so this character is going to be the villain of this entire movie, and his powers are going to be equal to Lamont Cranston's character, the Shadow, with the exclusion of he doesn't actually lurk in the shadows. He just has that mind power that basically the Shadow has. And so we end up right away when this Khan character and I'm just going to call him Khan for the rest of the review. We end up having Khan coming to this security guard and telling him to blow his temple, blow his head, kill himself. And he does so because Khan tells him to do so. And so while the museum people come back, we have Khan, who is hiding in the shadows, very much statue-like, and then eventually he ends up vanishing. So we have it to where, and I'm kind of skipping around, I'm kind of doing this review in a very roundabout way because there's stuff that I want to kind of get out first. So we have it to where, of course, Lamont eventually ends up turning into the Shadow. And so we have it to where there are some mafia gangsters who are to go and throw a guy over a bridge with cement on his feet. Dr. Roy Tam. And so we have these mafia characters going and wanting to tip this guy over the bridge, but we end up finding the Shadow knows. And so we have this Shadow talking to this Duke Rollins and basically telling him that he knows every little bit of wrongdoing that this guy has ever done. And so we end up having this guy just firing away onto this bridge just anywhere. And so we have it to where this guy just fires a gun all around place, and then eventually he ends up getting an even bigger gun and tries to fire as much as humanly possible, but that does nothing. And so eventually we just have the Shadow going and killing Duke Rollins, and then seemingly having the other goons ending up running off because they're like, oh my god, this is crazy. And so eventually we have the Shadow shooting up Dr. Tam's feet, so that way Dr. Roy Tam could be able to get out of this concrete shoes that he's been in. And so we have seemingly Mo Sharenovich, Mo. I'll just call him Mo. This is Peter Boyle, the taxi driver. We have Mo coming and retrieving the Shadow, and so we have Shadow and Dr. Tam having a conversation, and so we have it to where the Shadow mentions to Roy Tam that he's going to make him one of his agents, and that he's going to have to memorize a secret code, where if anyone was to tell him if the sun is rising but the ice is slippery, and so that ends up coming up sometimes. I don't know exactly if that's the right phrase. I could be wrong. But it's such a weird phrase. So we eventually find out that also Mo owes the Shadow his life debt, so that's why he basically drives him around for free. As well as the Roy Tam becomes a agent of the Shadow, and so every single one of these agents end up with a Shadow ring. So we have it to where Roy Tam is like, well, could I ask my wife about this? And the Shadow goes, no. Like, you don't have a choice anymore. Like, I saved your life kind of thing, and you owe me. So, moving on. So, we go on and to eventually have Roy Tam being safely brought back home, and but Alec Baldwin will eventually, or the Shadow eventually will call upon Roy Tam yet again for information. So to find out information about the bomb that is going to be in the movie. So we eventually have the Shadow change into be Lamont Cranston, and he goes off to go and see the police commissioner who had supposedly become or had la, 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 la. The police commissioner had, I guess, adopted Lamont Cranston as his nephew, or I guess maybe Lamont Cranston had pulled some mind magic to make uh, the police commissioner be saying that he's like, oh well, I'm a family member of yours, I'm your cousin, and so on and so forth. So we have the police commissioner waiting for Lamont to show up, and he's like, God, like, it's kind of weird that you ask me to come to dinner with you and you're an hour late. And so we have it to where the police commissioner is talking about him eventually going and having a task force out for the Shadow, and we have the Shadow using his powers to tell the police commissioner, it's like, no, you're not going to have a task force being put on the Shadow. You don't even know what the Shadow is. You don't even think that it's real. And so the commissioner's like, yeah, like, I don't think it's real. You know what? I'm not going to put a task force together, and so on and so forth. And so eventually we have it to where these two are sitting down at dinner, and eventually we have Lamont noticing a woman come in, and it's Margot Lane, and we have the police commissioner who Lamont wants from the police commissioner to know who this new girl is, and so the police commissioner describes her, telling Lamont that she hears voices and there's something odd about her, and so we have it to where Lamont goes out of his way to no longer go to dinner with the police commissioner, but to go and sit next to Margot Lane to talk to her because he's fascinated by the fact that she seems to be a fairly odd person. And so we end up having it to where Lamont tells Margot, it's like, you know what I've always had a craving for? Pecan duck. And so Margot's like, oh my God, I actually wanted that too. And so they end up going to a completely different restaurant, and we have Lamont speaking perfect Mandarin and ordering them duck. And so we have it to where eventually Margot is consistently picking uh, Lamont's brain, saying that he had complimented her on her dress and he had said nothing. And so he's like, well, that's what I thought I was going to say. And so Margot's like, oh my God, like, I haven't done this in so long. Like, to be able to pick a man's brain, like, I haven't done that in like years. And so it's so interesting. And so Lamont is starting to realize that he's like, oh my God, like, this is a little bit scarier than I thought it was. And so eventually we have it to where Lamont is consistently trying to get rid of Margot, but Margot keeps landing into being consistently with Lamont. And so we push on. So we have it to where Lamont eventually goes to his sanctum consistently, and we easily have it to where this villain of this story is to find exactly where Lamont is and keep going after him, which I thought was fascinating. Because we have it to where Lamont is seemingly having a dream, and it seems that there is this bizarrish accident that happens at his home to make him wake up from this dream to realize, oh my god, there's something evil coming. So we have it to where eventually that Lamont goes to his sanctum to eventually meet Khan, and Khan knows the guy of which that Lamont was previously before this, and so we have it to where Khan wants Lamont to team up with him so they could take on the world. And Lamont has no interest, and he has no idea what Khan is even talking about, any previous life that he had had besides this one. And we consistently have it to where Lamont is trying to avoid all of this stuff, but eventually he realizes that this is going to be the villain of the story, basically. So, because while we end up having this scenario where we find out something had gone wrong in this museum, there seems to have been some police detective that ends up sending a note to the Shadow, which ends up going into this bizarre tube-like system that makes its way all the way back to Lamont, so he could say, oh, okay, well, I need to go into the sanctum. So we eventually have it coincidentally that Margot Lane has a father named Reinhardt Lane, and this Reinhardt character is a guy that is to come up with some atomic bomb. And it's kind of interesting because this character doesn't know the difference between red and green, and so Margot has to consistently tell him the difference between red and green. Because we have Reinhardt who's wearing a red dress shirt, and he says, "Well, like Margot, you told me that I'd look good in green," and we have it to where Margot says it's like, well, yeah, but you're wearing red. We have it to where he has a mug that's green, and so she points that out. It's like, well, hey, this is green, this is red. And so we have it to where this is going to come back at some point to haunt us, because we have this bizarrish character that can't tell colors, I guess, because maybe he's colorblind in that way. So moving on. So eventually we have it to where Khan is to eventually go and try to manipulate Reinhardt to work for him. And while also doing that, he ends up taking along Tim Curry's character, who is Farley Claymore, along with him, but Khan doesn't use his powers of persuasion to get Farley. Farley is just a sleazebag who is just easy to say, hey, you want to join an evil regime? And Harley's like, sure, why not, kind of thing. And so we have it to where when Farley and Margot meet, we have it to where Farley's like, well, hey, would you like to see my my globe, or my God, what is it? His beryllium sphere. Would you like to see my beryllium sphere? And Margot's like, no, I don't want to see any bit of your sphere. I mean, so we go on and we have Farley, who is just like, God, he's just treated like crap. And so that is going to come back to haunt some people. And so we have it to where Reinhardt is coming up. Reinhardt Lane is going to create a bomb for Khan, and so Khan, uh, we end up having it to where seemingly Khan goes off into finding a seemingly empty uh, plot that there had been some building that had been torn down at some point. And so we end up finding out that that building actually does exist. It's been just to the point of Khan using his power to have people no longer to be able to see this building. But eventually, when Khan does die, eventually you'll be able to see the entire building and everyone else will. Evidently, it's some uh, Hotel Artemis, I believe is what it was called, but I could be wrong. So, moving on. So, we go on into this movie, and we consistently have it to where Lamont is meeting Khan um, to talk things over. We have it to where Khan is at a restaurant wearing the exact same suit and tie that Lamont is wearing, and I thought that that was really fascinating. There was at one point where Lamont is having a dream where he is kind of peeling back his face and pulling his face off to eventually find out that he is quite possibly Khan underneath. And that is a nightmare of which that he had when Margot had spent the night with him. Because we end up having it eventually where Khan ends up going and using his powers to have Margot try and assassinate Lamont. And so we have it to where Margot makes it to Lamont's place and tries to shoot Lamont, and she ends up realizing that Lamont is the Shadow because Khan gave Margot the orders to kill the Shadow, and she had found out that that was Lamont, and so we end up having her stay the night because Margot wants to work with Lamont to try and find her father that has gone missing. And so going along, so we eventually have at some point Lamont eventually going after Farley and to try to get information, and we end up having Farley in this big giant sphere of sorts that is to fill up with water. So we have Alec, we have Lamont's character going to get information from Farley, and Farley ends up releasing water uh, into this container of which that he is in, to notice that all of a sudden that there are like holes in the water that he realizes are footprints. So we have it to where Farley ends up firing away onto these footprints to have Lamont's character, or the Shadow at this point, uh, getting hit and shot. So we have it to where Farley seals this container of which that they were both in, and Farley ends up sealing it and leaving, to where now the Shadow is just kind of stuck in this container, having it filled with water. And so we have it to where Lamont reaches out to Margot via psychic power to have her help him escape this. And it seems luckily that Lamont had shot up a couple of bullet holes into there so he can have some more time to be able to breathe in air. So we have it to where Margot scrambles to make her way to Lamont to open up this container for her to come flying back because of the water, and then having Lamont kind of flying out. So we make our way to. I'm trying to skip around as much as humanly possible with this movie. There's quite a bit going on within this film, but I kind of want to skip around a lot just to get to the point of the review and get kind of done with this review, because of how like challenging some of the parts are and so on and so forth. There's quite a bit of times where we have Khan's men who end up having to steal people and or try to like. There's a lot of times where Khan's men are to go after the Shadow to otherwise be killed off a lot of the times, which I like. A lot of this stuff is really fascinating, the fight out parts, but it's a very odd ending as well. But anyway, so we go on and eventually have it to where the Shadow is starting to realize that Khan had used his power to hide the Hotel Artemis for a very long time. And he can see this building, but no one else can. And so we have it to where Lamont is asking if anybody can see this building, and no one can but him. And so we have it to where Lamont makes his way to this building, and eventually Margot is to eventually follow him to help her father. So we have it seemingly where Khan is going to detonate this bomb, this atomic bomb. We have it to where Lamont goes to the doctor Roy Pam to ask about information, and so that information leads him to eventually finding out that Reinhardt could create this atom bomb or atomic bomb, and so we have it to where they scramble on to eventually getting to find where Reinhardt is and where Khan is, and so we end up having a fight out here. So we eventually have the Shadow making his way through this building, eventually having it to where Khan sends his men out, and so we have it to where Farley is a part of these men, and so we end up having it to where consistently the Shadow is making his way through, and we have to where at some points that the Shadow is like tossing these men off these buildings. Like, there was one interesting moment where we had Khan who had gotten insulted by some sailor, and Khan ends up taking the sailor and having him jump off this building because he insulted him. I thought that was like a really interesting moment. It was kind of an interesting effect for this movie. So, and anyways, we have it to where at some point that we see the Shadow in the shadows, and there are quite a bit of times where we have it to where there is at one point when Shadow is fighting Khan's men, and they take arrows and they shoot the Shadow with arrows, and that sticks the Shadow's coat to the wall, meaning that his coat was made of shadow, and so it stuck to the wall. So Shadow had a difficult time coming out of the shadows to try and thwart these con men, which I thought was really interesting. So, moving on, so we have it to where the Shadow is to go and try to fight Farley. And we have Farley who has this, I don't know what exactly it's called, but it's like a machine gun of that time period. And so we end up having Farley going along with the gun, and we have him with a flashlight. And so we eventually have it to where Farley is scanning around with his flashlight, and eventually he sees the Shadow. So we have Farley who is firing off onto the shadows, and so we have it to where Farley is just crazily firing in circles. He's losing his effing mind, and so we have it to where the shadow tells tells Farley that he needs to find an exit. So we have it to where Farley forcibly finds his way out through a glass window of sorts that ends up having him further along into the hotel, falling to his death. So we have it to where Shadow dismantles a lot of Khan's men to have him eventually fight out with Khan, while Margot is going off to find Reinhardt Reinhardt Elaine to dismantle this bomb. So we have it to where both lanes are going and trying to get this bomb and defuse it, and that just creates a lot more worse things to go on. Reinhardt eventually clips a wire that ends up speeding up the timer. Eventually, the bomb ends up falling onto the ground into a big silver bowling ball of sorts, and then this bowling ball just starts to roll, so to speak, to where eventually the lanes are trying to stop this bomb from rolling around so they can defuse it more, to where eventually this ball ends up, this giant atomic bomb ball ends up crashing into this elevator shaft, which eventually helps them to be able to, with the stop of this momentum of this bomb, ends up helping them defuse it, where Reinhardt has to figure out the wires now. And so he's like, well, like, I think I'll cut the green wire or the red wire. And so we end up having it to where Margot says, like, oh my god, no, don't cut that wire. It's like, that's not the green wire. This is green, this is red. And so Reinhardt ends up cutting the right wire, which causes the bomb to completely stop ticking, which solves the whole bomb situation. And so now we have it to where now we can mostly focus on the Shadow versus Khan. So we seemingly have it to where Khan uses the dagger from the monk from the early movie. We end up finding out that Khan had killed this monk himself, hence why now he has the dagger. And so we eventually have it to where the Khan ends up taking this dagger and having it fight the Shadow. And so it seems that we have it to where this dagger, we have to where Shadow is kind of getting his butt whooped yet again. But it seems that eventually we have it to where Shadow and the sword is kind of and the dagger is kind of mimicking one another. We have it to where at some point that Shadow is kind of wiping his face, and we have the dagger doing the exact same motion, kind of realizing that maybe, quite possibly, Khan doesn't have all of the control over this dagger, to where eventually we have it to where Shadow ends up going and seemingly having it to where the dagger ends up stabbing Khan in the leg. And so eventually we have it to where it's like mind power against mind power, and Shadow is to eventually win. We eventually have it to where Khan is to go into this other room filled with mirrors, and Shadow is to shatter every single one of these mirrors all around Khan. And Khan is like, no, no. And so we eventually have it to where the Shadow crashes all these mirrors and kills all these mirrors to eventually have one piece of a mirrored piece ending up into Khan's head. So Khan is to wake up seemingly in a mental institution, and he is to be seemingly alerted via some doctor. And so we have Khan, who is in some straitjacket, telling this doctor to let him out and let him loose, and so on and so forth. And we have this doctor laughing at him, like, ha ha ha, yeah, there's no way that's going to happen in a million years. And so we end up finding out that the Shadow ended up taking the uh, end up taking that mirrored piece, and he put that there for a reason, because we end up finding out that the doctors who were at this mental facility ended up taking the upper part of Khan's brain out to have it be that he could never use these psychic powers anymore. And so we now find out that Khan no longer has the ability of his mental power anymore. And so now he's going to be spending the rest of his life in this mental hospital. And also, this doctor that had seen Khan was also wearing the red ring that any number of the shadow people have held. So we have it be that seemingly everything has gone correct and everything has uh, what does that mean? We have it to where the shadow has won, let's say that, and so we have it to where it's kind of like the Batman Forever scenario, where at the very end the Riddler ends up going to jail or an insane asylum, and we end up having the shadow kind of like, yeah, I win yet again. And so we end up also having the Hotel Artemis kind of appearing out of the shadows. And so when we have it to where Khan has seemingly lost, the hotel reappears for everyone to see. Because we ended up finding out that this hotel had supposedly been demolished years ago, but nobody knows why or how. But it seems that eventually, when Lamont eventually can see the hotel, eventually he realizes that, okay, that must be where Khan is. And so, yeah, just overall, a really fun movie. I really enjoy it. There's something about it that is just so odd, but I can really just enjoy this movie overall. Um, but yeah, there's something about it that I just is like, man, this movie's so odd, but I enjoy it. It's weird. Um, and eventually we have it to where like the good guy wins, and so yeah, that's a good conclusion of the story. So I guess with that, I think really for this review, I probably rushed a lot of it because I was just like, God, I just want to just kind of get through of it. So there's little details here and there that I didn't get to, but meh, looking at it, this is also one of those where people may be interested in it, people may not be interested in it at all, because when looking at it, it's the shadow. And so people may have not have even known what this movie is or what the heck this is about. So without a doubt, I am going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.